Welcome, y'all, to the weird and wonderful world of Babylonia. I'm your host, Michael, and in this season of the Babylonian podcast, we're going through the New Testament Apocrypha. And you can join us too. Find the same summaries and notes that have been guiding us in our journey through these New Testament Apocrypha with the link in the show notes below or by going to our website, thebabylonian.com. All right, let's look into that New Testament Apocrypha. With scholars, sages, and the scriptures, let's all Bible on. It's another great day going through the apocryphal Gospels, and today we are going to be going through the Arabic Infancy Gospel. So, since the very first, not since the first Infancy Gospel, since the second Infancy Gospel, since the Proto-Evangelium of James, we have been seeing Mary take a more and more prominent position in these infancy gospels, and she even started to take some of Jesus's powers in a sense and some of his position. And we're going to see more and more of that with the gospel that we're going to be looking at today, which is the Arabic Infancy Gospel. So in this Infancy Gospel, Mary is not only Mary, she is exclusively referred to as Lady Mary throughout the gospel. So even just the fact that she goes by that title throughout the entirety of the apocryphal gospel, you can tell that she has this new position, just like, I guess, Jesus Christ. I guess her being lady is somewhat similar in a side to, not that that title is on the same level, but the fact that in the same way that Jesus is given the title Christ, she has her own title. You can see that she's given this new prominence in this apocryphal gospel. And so we know that we talked about when we were talking about the infancy gospel of Thomas, if you remember that, and you even said how the Quran even has some stories from that infancy gospel. Well, it technically does have stories that go back to the infancy gospel of Thomas. Recall that all of our infancy gospels, on one way or another, at least the ones we're looking at, are taking from the infancy gospel of Thomas on the one hand, and or the Proto-Evangelium of James. Those are like the two ones very early on, and then all these other ones are taking from those and inspired and based off of those, maybe changing up the stories a little bit. And so this is actually the gospel that Muhammad would have known about, and where he would have actually adapted stories from the infancy gospel of Thomas is this Arabic infancy gospel, which makes sense since it's in its title that we refer to it today is called the infancy gospel, the Arabic infancy gospel. So anyways, just a couple more background, just a little bit more background information, and then we'll jump into this gospel. This Arabic infancy gospel was written sometime between 400 and 600 AD. It doesn't claim any authorship by an apostle or canonical biblical character. No character is claimed to be the author. It was written in the West, which I find interesting since it's called the Arabic Infancy Gospel. It was originally written in Syriac. We don't have, at least in the apocryphal New Testament that I'm reading, it doesn't talk about anybody who referenced it, any church fathers or decrees or councils. The original name given to the book is the Book of Joseph Caiaphas. So I guess that would be the original author, at least in one version. And so, yeah, like I talked about, this is going to have a lot of parts based on the Proto-Evangelium of James. This one also has some that are based on a collection of probably Egyptian fantasies that focus especially on miracles performed by Mary. That's the large majority of it. Then there's one chapter that might have been from a different source, and then the end of it is all based on the infancy gospel of Thomas. So let's jump into it. Are you ready to get into this infancy gospel?
Let's do it.
Apocryphal gospel. Okay, sweet. So this apocryphal gospel opens up. It's based on the Proto-Evangelium of James. So it's just remember that. If you haven't, you have to go back and listen to that and the infancy gospel of Thomas, because the end is based on that. But it opens up with Jesus having been born. He's lying in a cradle, and he speaks to Mary as a newborn baby and says, "I am Jesus, the Son of God, the Logos whom you brought forth. as the angel Gabriel announced to you, and my Father has sent me for the salvation of the world. Already pretty high on the orthodoxy index. Yeah, I don't know. You can't get more direct than
Nothing
that.
untrue. Nothing untrue about that. And also, it seems to be claiming that Jesus is very quick. He's a sharp person. He's figuring things out at a very young age.
Yeah, there's no room for this growing in wisdom and stature. He's born and he's got it. That's great.
Good
I
theology and
guess he
everything.
has, yeah, really. And I guess he also has like, I guess this isn't a miracle on another level because not only does he know language and have that, but like as a little munchkin who has no teeth, this dude's just like spitting bars and yapping already, you know? Anyways, it's interesting. Um, so anyways, then so there's no story about Anna, Mary's mother, or Mary's annunciation, but rather it opens up with Augustus's edict that all the people have to go to be registered. So then Joseph, and remember, this is summarizing, this is going through the stuff that happens in the Proto-Evangelium of James, but with twists and more expansions. So Joseph goes to get a handmaid for Mary because, according to the apocryphal traditions, the birth just comes upon Mary while they're traveling and they have to go to a cave. So remember that Joseph is going to get a handmaiden for Mary to help her deliver. And she sees Mary and she says she's not like any daughter of Eve. And Mary says, as my son has no equal among children, so his mother has no equal among women.
Ooh, they're honoring her even
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. So, like, from the get go, not only do you have Jesus making this explicit claim to divinity, but it's almost like in the same way that Jesus is divine. So, Mary is, while she might not be sharing in the essence of the Trinity, she's got to be something higher.
Mm.
So, and obviously you can see where they get this from, or at least you could imagine them understanding the Magnificat, Mary's song, where she's like glorifying God, and Gabriel coming and announcing to her, "Hail Mary, full of grace," is one translation, or the angel greets her and calls her blessed among women. But yeah, this really just amps it up to the next level. So anyways, the shepherds come to visit, and when the shepherds come to visit, it says that the cave where Mary is giving birth becomes a temple of the upper world as angels and humans are praising God. That's pretty epic. I mean, so far this is pretty epic. It's pretty much just turning up the volume on everything, and Mary as well, but I feel like that's pretty epic. Yeah, you get this idea of, heaven coming down to earth, God, the kingdom of God coming even as Jesus is born, which is pretty gnarly. So then this takes a really wild turn. So anyways, Jesus ends up getting circumcised. After Jesus' circumcision, they put his foreskin, and some manuscripts, there's different manuscripts, so some say it's his umbilical cord, but most say his foreskin. They put it into a jar of oil nard and give it to an oil dealer, telling him not to sell it for any amount of money. So that's already interesting. The interesting thing is, this is explained as being the jar that Mary the sinner breaks on Jesus's feet and then wipes Jesus's feet with her hair.
Wow. This kind of reminds me of someone else.
Please share. I know where you're going with this because you told me about this, but it's really interesting.
It's like this. I read about this in Tom Holland's book Dominion. I think it's either that or the podcast. But it's one of the two. There's a person, and she'd be in the 14th century, named Catherine of Siena. Anyway, there's a lot of things going on with this girl, but she, we'll say, believed or envisioned or claimed to have been married to Jesus, and she got a ring, an engagement ring from Jesus. And that engagement ring was, in fact, the very item that was put in that jar right there with all the oil, after post the 8th day operation. And when it had the ring, like, there was still blood on it. So there's a whole deal with her and blood and everything like that. But anyways,
Yikes! Wow.
it shows how
This foreskin,
meaningful. It shows how meaningful this moment is. Right?
yeah.
That's how you marked the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, right? Was with that, and then there's some interesting stories that come out of these meaningful marks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting history, you know. I guess it's an interesting, you know, I guess there's not, I guess it helps that it's like round already and you can fit it on your finger, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
But it's a very interesting fascination for sure.
yeah,
But yeah, it is good, like you said, like this is an important part of the gospel is Jesus, you know, being circumcised. You know, he is the ultimate fulfillment of Israel. And so he has to take on the covenant circumcision. And I recently, within this past year, joined a liturgical church, and there's a holiday for the presentation of Jesus at the temple. So that's a day that you know, a feast day that you celebrate. So yeah, I mean, it's cool. I guess you could also say what goes around comes around. You could see it as maybe like a you could maybe see it with this whole thing of like Mary pouring out this same nard on Jesus's feet. You could see it maybe as like a chiasm or like this mark between marking just after Jesus's birth and marking just before his death. I guess that's the
as
which
being
is
like the
kind of
time
cool.
when he's
It's
walking
pretty
around doing his
weird.
ministry. Like that's what it's. Yeah. And
Yeah,
what do you?
that's the best interpretation I have.
Why do you think it's something so significant? What do you think makes it significant in like a liturgical church or in a church calendar that we mark that?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely something in the canonical scriptures in Luke, actually, just in, well, okay, I guess Matthew probably talks about Jesus being circumcised. Or I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. I guess now that I think of it, maybe he doesn't. Yeah, okay. I think it's just Luke. But I know Luke is the one that slows down, is the only one that has accounts that if Matthew mentions it, he mentions it in past. Actually, no, he doesn't, right? Because Matthew talks about later on in Herod killing people who are the age of 2. So Luke is the only gospel that talks about it. But within Luke, you have Anna comes over and sees him and you prophesies and tells people about him. And Simeon, I'm sorry, comes over to him and starts like praying this, singing this song over him, you know, which is also, I don't know. Luke definitely slows down and spends time talking about that moment. So it was significant for him. And that's another, uh, now I'm just kind of going off on a sidetrack. People say if there's any one Gentile author of the scriptures, then it was probably Luke the evangelist. But if he was a Gentile, he was a very Jewish Gentile. You know, there's a lot of Hebrew Bible themes and imagery and assumptions throughout. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess it would just have to be Luke slowing down to do that and just the fact that he's fulfilling the scriptures. That's my best guess. I don't know if you have anything better than that.
As regards to
Mm,
significance, I think it is worth pointing out that if the Bible does take the time to go ahead and mention it, this event, then it is significant. So, it sounds really weird, but just because the Bible mentions it, I think that inherently makes it significant and because it has any association with Jesus. So, and then I think perhaps maybe also that to one extent or another, and I know there's like varying opinions on this, but like
mhm,
that faithfulness to the kingdom of Jesus is a continuation of what
mm,
Jesus was doing in the first century. And I'm sure there's, some people who might get a little bit uncomfortable with continuation or whatever, because I think there's different perspectives. Like some people say the church replaced the Old Testament kingdoms. And then there's some people who say it's a complete continuation. Some people say it's a mixture in between or whatever. But I think we can at least agree that probably to at least a small extent, if not way more, that there's
mm.
some level of it being a continuation of, the Abrahamic promise from like Genesis 12.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Huh.
That was my
That's a
guess. I
good
don't know.
point. Yeah. No, that I think that tracks. That makes sense. That's also interesting that I hadn't heard that before, but that makes sense that people would think that the gospels became less Jewish the later they were written. But yeah, Luke is definitely, if you actually read Luke and like pay attention to like Jewish themes in it, it's pretty Jewish, you know? Simeon even says like this guy will cause the fall and resurrection of many in Israel, you know? I don't know. There's a lot of anyways, yeah. So, all right. So, anyways, there's that whole thing happens. And then later, some magi come, they give Jesus gifts. And then this angel that is in the form of a star leads Mary and Joseph back to their country. And that just has to do with in ancient times, stars were seen as spiritual beings. So yeah, and then this is interesting. I noted the star that led the Magi was an angel, just like the angels that told the shepherds to come see Jesus. So I guess there's kind of like another level of significance there. That was my own note. So I don't know. That was my thought whenever I was reading this, which
That
has been a
being
little
that,
bit
like,
since recording now. But
that would be like Jesus brings together different kinds of people. Like, the
mhm,
angel, same thing. Like they're both being drawn by the same thing. And so in some
mm,
senses, making the wise men or magi the same as the shepherds in their worship of Jesus.
their approach.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I guess so. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this might have been something to do. Maybe this had some type of kind of trying to clear the gospels of any astrology hints,
Mm,
because you could definitely see the Magi being pagans looking at the stars and seeing the stars to come to Jesus. That just occurred off the dome. I don't know why that didn't occur earlier, but that would also, I could also see that being a possibility. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Anyways, so that's the whole backstory based on loosely inspired by the Proto-Evangelium of James. So then later, we get later stories, not necessarily about their birth. We have one where there's this woman who's possessed by Satan who can't put on clothes or live in a house. And when people put chains on her, she breaks them, and she often goes naked into the wilderness. Mary sees her one time and pities her, and then Satan leaves her, and the woman says that Mary healed her. It just says that Mary had pitied her, but then Satan just leaves her from, whatever it meant that Mary pitied her.
so,
So Mary is like unintentionally like casting Satan off this woman.
and it's mimicking the Legion story, right? It seems to be
Yeah.
mimicking the Legion story
Yeah.
because
Do you
she's
want to
chained
explain that?
up. Yeah, so there's a story in the Gospel of Mark where there's this guy who I think it's in maybe Luke and Matthew as well, but it's certainly in Mark where he's like, they've got him with
Mhm.
chains and he cuts himself on rocks or whatever. It changes a little bit from one account to the other. And then basically, Jesus casts out the legion of demons or the numerous demons away from him. And the demons go into the pigs and stuff. In this particular account, it sounds like it's putting Mary in the spot of a story like Jesus and making her in some ways like him in the sense, not just as like honor that she has a title, but also that she's doing supernatural things
Yeah. She
and
doesn't
casting out
even
demons.
speak to the demons. Yeah. Yeah, for real. She's just like pitying her, and I don't know, I that could just be the story's short form of her, praying an exorcism over. But either way, yeah, it's a recall to that, and it's obviously trying to like connect Mary with Jesus there. Yeah. So we're getting into this section. There's this whole middle section that has a bunch of stories with Mary doing this stuff. So, for example, there's this other story. Some sisters have a brother that has been hexed and turned into a mule. Hex just means cursed. I don't know why I wrote that in my notes as hexed. But, anyways, when they tell Mary about it, Mary tells Jesus to heal the mule, lifts up Jesus, kisses him, and they are healed. So, in this one, Mary is doing it's kind of like Mary is doing it, but by using Jesus almost as a type of relic, which is, I don't know, it's definitely, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't know if you have anything else with that, but that's, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess you could say maybe she's kind of directing his power, like he's doing things. She's directing his power, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, she's like channeling it. It's interesting. Anyways, so Mary and Joseph later, this is a fun story. Not a Mary miracle story, but a fun story. So Mary and Joseph are going and they're traveling through a desert at night, and they're taken by two robbers. Okay. Now, I'm just going to say we've already had a lot of connections to Luke. So, two robbers. You might be able to see where this is going. And we get their names, lucky us, Titus and Dumachus. And so, and there are other robbers that are asleep as they're walking through the desert. And Titus tells Dumachus that they should let them go before the others awake. So these robbers took Mary, Joseph, and the family. Or I guess it just says Mary and Joseph. And Titus tells Dumachus they need to let them go before the other robbers awake. And Dumachus refuses So Titus gives Dumachus 40 drachmas and his belt to let Mary and Joseph go. And Mary says that the Lord will sustain the robber who let them go and give him remission of sins. And Jesus says that 30 years later, he will be crucified at Jerusalem with Titus on his right, with Titus on his right hand and Dumachus on his left, and Titus will go into paradise.
Whoa. Well, at least it gives us, some background into these two people who we don't really get info into until literally at the end of all the gospel accounts that they're in, all the gospel accounts that they're in. So that's kind of nice. It does also, though, maybe it backtracks a little bit from, if you take the gospel account where Jesus tells this person who's just a criminal and says, hey, tonight, this very night, you'll be with me in paradise. Automatically that implies, well, it's like, what did he do that was good? And this actually maybe gives you an explanation for that, which might actually disappoint some people who were like excited about the fact that someone could enter paradise who perhaps didn't do anything good deserving of it other than maybe telling the other robber to be quiet and having faith in Jesus, So, it's kind of like a mixed thing. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool, but also maybe not so much, because the hope is that you wouldn't actually have to like prove yourself in order to get into paradise. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or at least that there could be circumstances where some people who don't have who suddenly like are like aware of their surroundings. And to be fair, this robber is like one of the few people, even among Jesus' friends and all the other people, who are recognizing who Jesus is and is kind of sticking up for Jesus against this other robber who's shaming him. Like, you have this Roman centurion after Jesus dies who recognizes who Jesus is. All his friends have abandoned him. Peter's straight up denying him, but his other friends aren't even there for him, like to stand up for him at the trial. And yeah, but at the same time, it's not like he can get off the cross, do a couple works to like, prove his faith or get baptized or anything, So it does kind of like it at least provides one case scenario. I don't think this is the reason why Luke wrote it necessarily, but it does give us like one scenario where it's like, okay, you do have to, this isn't the best way to articulate it, but probably make exceptions for whatever view of salvation that you have, or at least for most views of salvation. And then here you have this whole story where, like you said, it kind of it's like, oh, well, Jesus said today you'll be here with me in paradise, but really he's saying that to this dude who is like almost like this undercover robber. Otherwise it'd be weird in a sense, because it's like he's still a robber and he's been a robber this whole time,
I guess that's the point I didn't
and he
even
may have
think
been doing
about.
these good things. Yeah, but it's like,
or maybe he hasn't. Like, why is he getting executed? Did he like just choose, like, he's like, oh, I'm going to do this good thing and then just do horrible things up until the day that he was like next to Jesus on the cross?
yeah. Or maybe, I guess, maybe if we really, really wanted to clear this guy, if they wanted to do a better job, they should have made him at that point repent, get baptized, so it's clear that everybody who's saved was baptized, and then, become a good charitable Christian. And 30 years later, we get a scene where the Romans catch up to him and say, hey, we recognize you from 30 years ago. And then they crucify him.
Yeah, that would create something.
Still, like you said, I do think that's the point of why they're trying to add this in is, it seems pretty clear that they're trying to make this whole, it does seem to make problems with views of salvation other than, or it at least makes it more complicated. Let's just say that. Yeah. Other verses in the New Testament that talk about salvation by works or baptism or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Which I deleted scene right there.
I do think it's worth pointing out, like, the point of that story where that person, I'm not going to say it's the only point, but I do think that the main point of that story where the person on the cross next to Jesus, ends up being told he's going to be sent into paradise is less of a story trying to tell you all of the qualifications to get into heaven. And it is more of a story telling you that the message of the good news of Jesus' kingship is for everyone, right? And so it's like saying that it's supposed to be inclusive, not trying to get you to think about like all the qualifications, if that makes sense. But if you say, oh, well, therefore you don't really do anything to get to heaven, I don't know, that sounds a little bit counterintuitive. Not counterintuitive, but I think it's maybe missing the main point.
That's good. Yeah, because Luke's gospel is, if you look at the differences, just an overview of the differences of the gospels, Luke's point is looking at all the outsiders, especially the poor, and marginalized. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, good word, and caution for interpreting that passage even without this unpreserved, deleted scene. And then there's this other note in this gospel that says that Jesus does many other gospels not found in the infancy gospel of Thomas or the perfect gospel. So, and we actually don't, it's not just that my collection of the New Testament Apocrypha, because if you don't know, there are lots of editions of the New Testament Apocrypha that may include some and may not include others. We're just continuing to find more and more of these. It doesn't have all of them, and there's, we're still continuing to find more New Testament Apocrypha, but we do not have our hands on the perfect gospel. You may have wanted the perfect gospel, but yeah, all you get are these imperfect apocryphal gospels, unfortunately. But that's just interesting.
So
Alludes
just to be
to,
clear,
we don't know what we don't know.
you're saying there is a text called the perfect gospel that was probably around and we just don't have it? Yeah.
Yeah, this person, or at least some text that was at this time referred to as the perfect gospel.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, anyways, then we get another Mary miracle story. Going forward, this part at least the next significant sections are based on the infancy gospel of Thomas. So we have this story where there are two wives of one man with their own child who has a fever. One woman is Mary, the mother of Cleopas. Cleopas goes to Mary to ask her to make her mantle heal her son, and it does. So Mary uses her mantle to heal this lady's son. Again, we have this view of a relic, but this time it's Mary's mantle. So in the book of Acts, you have like the apostles passing by people and their shadows are healing people, or they're giving out handkerchiefs and it's touching people and healing people. So Mary's putting that on that apostolic level. So then the other mother's son dies, and she tries to kill Cleopas twice because Mary had healed Cleopas's child. So one time she tries to throw the child into a well, but the baby ends up floating. And then Mary, the mother of Cleopas, goes to Mary to tell her that the Lady Mary says God will avenge her. Then the other woman accidentally gets her feet caught in a well when she goes to it, falls in, breaks her skull, and dies. And this is supposedly a fulfillment of Psalm 9:15.
Like 915?
So, no, sorry, Psalm chapter 9,
chapter 9, verse 15.
Let me
Sorry,
actually,
I was wondering if you were implying that there's some text with like an expanded version of Psalms, but okay.
actually there is, but that'll be the season on the pseudepigrapha and on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Unfortunately, that's a later
Roger.
season. Good foreshadow.
Good Easter egg.
Let's see. Yeah, really. So Psalm 9:15, I'm looking this up right now. It says, "The nations have sunk down into the pit which they have made, in the net which they hid, their own foot has been caught." So, yeah. I actually just learned this because I'm reading through Dante's Inferno. There's a term for this called contrapasso. I'm pretty sure that's the term. It's not karma, which is, in the next life when you're reincarnated, which is a specifically, exclusively Buddhist belief, or maybe Hindu. I get those mixed up. But either way, this is the view that in eternity, damnation or reward, whatever your punishment is, it fits the crime. So just as she tried to throw Cleopas's son into the well, she's caught by the well and dies in it. You dig a pit, you fall into it. So that's just a nice fancy word you can throw out that's kind of cool and correct people when they say karma and they don't understand that that's a Buddhist term. But yeah, so Mary also had those ties to Cleopas. I feel like out of all the apocryphal texts, this is one of the best ones at just like including random scenes with like these side characters, or it's like, oh yeah, we go back, So.
Oh, so you think this is the Cleopas that's like the Luke 24 guy?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. This is Cleopas is the baby, and then this is his mother. It says that specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Dang.
Yeah, this guy, this person they really like the Gospel Luke, and they like adding in these deleted scenes. So, anyways, we get another story. Some lady has her son die from disease and entreats Mary to pray for her to God. So now she's asking Mary to pray for her, which I don't know for sure, but I think might be an indication, if not a conclusion, that people in that time were asking for Mary to pray for them. It might have been something that's, we're seeing the church move towards that direction. Mary prays to God and then tells her to put her baby next to Jesus as he sleeps, and the baby comes to life. The mother then thanks Mary, saying that, I know that the power of God dwells in you, so that your son heals those that partake of the same nature as himself. And this is all also attributed to this Gospel of Bartholomew, which I don't think we have. I think we have another one called the Gospel of Bartholomew, but I don't think we have one that this is referring to, that this story is from. But either way, this is interesting, not just because Mary's healing it, but now this lady, so Mary's praying for the lady, but then also this lady says, I know that the power of God dwells in you, Mary, so that your son heals those. So it's almost like, it's like they added in the ending part of like, the power of God dwells in you so that your son heals those that partake of the same nature as himself. It's almost like they added in that. To me, it feels like they add in that last part kind of as like a little bit of a buffer, but you can still see that they're definitely like elevating Mary more and more. So it's interesting. Then we get another story. A lady is afflicted by Satan, who continues to come to her as a dragon and attack her and suck out all her blood. So one lady who had been healed by Jesus sees her and gets Mary to help her. Mary gives her some of the water that Jesus had bathed in, which had been used to heal the previous lady who recommended Mary and many others to heal her son, and one of Jesus's swaddling cloths, which is also frequently given away to others to use. Again, I'm just giving some of the like examples of miracles that Mary is doing that show different perspectives. But Mary has been using Jesus's bathwater and Jesus' swaddling cloths to help people. So they give it to show the dragon whenever it comes to her. The dragon comes to attack her later. She puts the swaddling cloth over her eyes as she was earlier instructed and shoots out flaming coals at the dragon. And then the dragon falls down and cries out, what do I have to do with you, O Jesus, son of Mary?
Interesting. Well, okay. The reference, Jesus, son of Mary. What is that an allusion to? Like, what is that? Jesus.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I do feel like, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like there's something here as well that's like just off the tip of my brain, but like I'm just not able to fully connect it. But I feel like it's usually referred to, like, oh Jesus, son of David. I feel like that's the closest thing that I can think of when they say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on us. Like I think when when Jesus passes by the 10 Samaritans, Samaritans who have leprosy. Yeah,
That's
no,
the
not the
blind
blind.
man.
Well, there might be a blind man as well.
Okay.
I think there's multiple times when it's used. But yeah, but here they say, oh, Jesus, son of Mary, as if it's like, yeah, it's very interesting. But yeah, this lady like legit like gets laser vision from Jesus's swaddling cloths. Like this is like, this is this is definitely like, yeah.
One time during my developing years, I had a friend who would not call himself a Christian at that time, at least. I don't talk to this friend. And I told him one of the stories in the Bible, and he said it would have been cooler if blank, and was trying to come up with some like really cool powers that was coming out of something like that. Anyway, when I'm hearing you talk about this lady who gets laser vision from like swaddling clothes from Jesus, that's what it makes me think of. It's like, what happened? Maybe not that important, but it would be cool. And then so.
Yeah, wow, this is like actually like a Marvel director got their hands on apocryphal material on whatever was happening in the Gospel of Bartholomew. They were like, oh, you know what would be cool? And I like how like, I really wonder how common it was for like literature or other stories of that time to talk about like flaming coals to come out of people's eyes. Like how much closer to laser vision could you get in that day? Like that seems pretty innovative to me. I haven't read a lot, but shoot, like
maybe it's a referent. There's a part where it talks about being
flaming coals on your head.
Flaming coals on your head. You know what I mean? I don't think it is, but it could be.
Yeah, that would be a wild connection. Okay, well, if anyone in our audience gets that connection and can like make it, please put it in the comments because I'm dying to know, and I will look at it. But yeah, that is wicked. That's pretty crazy. Okay, so the next story that I have, this is another illusion. So Judas Iscariot is tormented by Satan as a boy. So he's a little boy. Because of this, Judas bites everyone around him. So his mother hears about Mary and Jesus and brings her son over to them. And when Judas tries to bite Jesus, foreshadowing, he can't. But Jesus strikes him on the right side. It says he weeps. It doesn't say if it's Jesus or Judas. And Satan flees from him. Again, it doesn't say whether it's Judas or Jesus. I'm assuming Judas. Then the place where he strikes Jesus is the same place where Jesus will be stabbed with a spear when he is crucified, according to this apocryphal gospel. So
okay, well, I'm going to do the whole. It would be cool if I can, if the same side he did that was the same side that Judas kissed him. But that's my, that's my opinion.
Oh,
that would be like full circle. Okay, but one thing I do think is kind of interesting is they have you can tell based on the stories in here that the role of the mother, not just Jesus, but mothers just have like a really important role in the lives of all the characters, which is kind of interesting. Like it shows you what, I guess, how they saw parents, moms, perhaps as, and I'm not sure how I'd qualify like what particular role they are. What would you think role they kind of viewed mothers as? Maybe the same way as it always is. Maybe there's no difference. But like just that the mother's involvement in the lives of their kids. Caretaker? Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I didn't notice this as I was reading, and I didn't write it as in my notes. But as I'm like going over this with you, I have noticed that. But what I've noticed is that usually there's also often a son, specifically a son who's in danger. And so usually there's a son and their mother goes and gets the mother of Jesus, and then the mother of Jesus uses one of Jesus's things. So it's like the mothers relate to the mothers and asking help for their sons as they need help. So actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I want to be cautious because I really don't know, but I wonder if they see this as a way of, like, the mothers here are kind of like allegorically kind of representing people who can intercede and pray to Mary and ask Mary to, pray to Jesus to have things done for others. So maybe in that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again,
we should
might be a
probably
little bit of a leap.
Yeah. Be careful with it.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely wouldn't go around, telling, Catholic or Orthodox people, hey, where intercession to Mary came from? It came from this, I'm trying to advise against that. I'm just saying that's one stray thought, maybe look it up on Google, or I guess ChatGPT is the thing today. But yeah. Anyways, that's an interesting motif throughout this story of mothers. Yeah. So anyways, we see after Jesus turns 7, Jesus is playing with clay and creating all types of creatures with other little boys, like, remember in the Infancy Gospel, Thomas. While the other boys praise their works, Jesus says he will make his walk, and a boy asks if he is the son of the Creator. Jesus is like, oh, I'm going to make my clay thing walk. And the boy's like, oh yeah, I believe you. By the way, you son of the Creator of the universe. Jesus makes his clay creature leap, and eat. And then he makes birds fly and eat and drink. And the children tell their parents, and their parents tell them to stay away from Jesus because he's a wizard. So interesting. Okay, this story actually cracked me up. So there's a story, Joseph is working as a carpenter, but the text just directly says he was not very skillful in carpentry. So, it just has stories of Jesus continuing to stretch out, widen, or change wood as needed so that Joseph can do what he does, what he needs to do. So, maybe Joseph can't like cut like a wood plank it's too short. So Jesus has to like make it longer for him. So I don't know. I just thought it was funny to share that. You've seen The Passion of the Christ.
I have. It's been a few years. But yes.
Okay, yeah, there's this scene in it where it's like calling back to Jesus doing carpentry, and this kind of reminds me of it, but it's just Mary and Jesus in the scene. But Jesus is like showing Mary this stool that he's making, And it took me a second to like think of like why is he doing this? But he shows Mary, and he's like mocking people who sit on stools. He's doing like an air seat, and he's like laughing, and Mary is laughing with him. And then I was like, oh yeah, because I guess people had like lower down tables and they just laid on the ground. Yeah, there's nothing really that connects those two. Like, you know, it's not based on that, but I just think it's a funny little. Anyways, yeah. So, anyways, then there's this other story. Jesus goes out to play with boys one time. The boys hide from Jesus, and so Jesus goes to the door and sees a woman standing there. Jesus asks the woman where the boys went, and she says, "There are no boys." Jesus asks who she sees in the furnace, and she says, 3-year-old goats. So Jesus commands them to come out to their shepherd, and the kids come out as kids and dance around him. Kids being baby goats. The woman is afraid and praises Jesus as the good shepherd of Israel. And Jesus says that the sons of Israel were like the Ethiopians among the nations, and that makes all the goats into human kids.
Okay, so what is it the sons of Israel are like the Ethiopians among the nations? Is that what it says? What does that mean?
Yeah. I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I just take it as an odd reference.
And then he turns the goats into
Jesus
kids.
is, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there you can definitely see that Jesus is kind of like the good shepherd. You can make that analogy. And there's 3 kids that go into the furnace and that are led out of the furnace. I will say that I don't know if you knew this. I can't remember if it's Babel. I think it's Chaldea. Chaldea, the word Chaldea means furnace or something like that. So when Jesus calls Abraham out of Chaldea, or in Chaldea, or maybe it's one of those. Is in Chaldea. And when Jesus calls Abraham out of Chaldea, it's like he's calling him out of the furnace. And so I've heard that, the 3 youth, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, being thrown into the furnace might be kind of similar to that. It's definitely calling on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being in the furnace. I don't know what the implication is. They're Israelites among the nations, and this is comparing them to Ethiopians among the nations. So I don't know. I guess maybe Ethiopia was just a very Christian place, because I know that Ethiopia is very Christian. So maybe Ethiopians were just so associated with Christians, because there's a lot of stuff we have preserved only in Ethiopic, and it was like, it's a very ancient Christian nation. So yeah. And I guess if this is an Arabic infancy gospel, and it's written
that makes sense.
in Syriac, it's more down in the Arabian Peninsula, so they're also more familiar with them. I know Armenia, from my understanding, is the earliest Christian nation, or longest living one or something. Anyways, yeah, that's the closest I got. But
I think Armenia would be further away from Ethiopia.
Arabia.
So, well, from Arabia, right? Arabia is kind of in the middle of them. So anyway, I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure what to do with that story, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, in the next story, they're in Adar, wherever that is, and some boys come together and put a crown of flowers on Jesus' head, putting their clothes on the ground before him and standing at his side like servants. They drag other boys by force to go before him and tell them to adore him as king, and then they leave. And Jesus just allows it. He allows these kids to drag these other kids before him and like worship him. I mean, the crown of flowers is obviously like a call forward to the crown of thorns that he's going to have disgracefully put on him. And the clothes being put before him is like the triumphal entry. And there's one more connection I'm making, but I don't know if you have any other thoughts before I real quick spit this out, because I think this is interesting just off the dome. Okay. So in the which is the narrative whenever Jesus rides on a donkey into Jerusalem, people are laying down their coats and they're in their palm branches and saying, Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And the Pharisees tell Jesus, make these people stop. And Jesus' response is to say, don't you know that out of the babes of infants, that there will be praise out of the mouths of infants, I think is what he says. I know that he quotes from the Septuagint version. I know that the Hebrew says that God establishes a bulwark out of, or like a defense out of the mouths of infants. So
dang, that's actually cool. It's connecting like children worshiping him to the triumphal entry. That's appropriate.
Yeah. That just clicked with me right now. So I guess maybe you could say maybe these, because for me, it doesn't make too much sense when Jesus quotes that in the triumphal entry. Maybe you could say that Jesus is linking them to babes because they're people asking for deliverance, and Jesus is coming in humbly, and these people can't do very much, and so they're like it in that way. And Jesus is just saying, principally, God works with the weak. But maybe this is kind of interpreting it as like when it's saying babes and infants, it's saying since they were little kids, these kids were like, inviting in Jesus as king, a little forcefully, bringing people, throwing them on the ground to bow down to him. But I don't know, maybe these same people grew up, were at Jerusalem, and were calling Hosanna in the highest. Yeah. So some boy went and got bit by a snake. And the servants of Jesus, who were, laying down their clothes in front of him and hailing him as king, dragged this boy over to Jesus. So I guess maybe you could reinterpret the dragging as like a kind dragging. They bring him before Jesus. And then Jesus says, okay, we're going to go kill that serpent. So he goes to the serpent. The serpent immediately comes out, submits to Jesus, sucks out all the venom out of the kid, and then goes back, and Jesus curses it, and it explodes. And then we find out that the boy that Jesus healed was Simon the Canaanite.
Is that supposed to be Simon Bar-Jonah? The Peter? Or is that Simon the Zealot? Or is it Judas the Zealot? I think it's Simon the Zealot.
Yeah, I think Simon is a zealot. If he's a zealot, then he wouldn't have been a Canaanite, I don't think. So is this interpreting... I could not see a Canaanite becoming a zealot, since the zealots were the people who wanted to destroy Rome and establish Israel as an independent state. So I'm going to assume this is... Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I knew that was one of his...
To be cautious with that, though, I heard someone on a podcast talking about Simon the Zealot not actually being in that category of zealot being like anti-Roman Empire people, but actually just being a really zealous person. Anyway, I don't know what the merit is one way or another on those two things. Michael is referring to like there was a group in the supposedly in the first century around the time of Jesus up until like 70 AD, right? There was a group of people who were like zealous Jewish people who were anti-Roman Empire, and they were very passionate about it. And I think at one point they had a disruption large enough that would bring the Romans to come and take out the temple. Is that correct? Is that how that happened?
They went out into the wilderness to follow some leader, if I remember correctly, who said, we're not paying taxes to Rome. We're taking Rome by force. I can't remember exactly what else they says. And I can't remember if they go by the same name or if they're just a similar group who had different things. But
okay.
I think the only other place that we hear of them from is from Flavius Josephus's account. I'm saying Josephus also talks about these people called Sicarii, because that's the name of knives, and they would go out into groups of people and stab people to death, and then they would scream as if they were like a spectator being like, oh my gosh, you just got... So they like sink their knife into you, pull it out and hide it, and be like, oh my gosh, you just got stabbed. And so I can't remember if those were connected with the zealots or... But yeah, anyways, those are...
Okay.
So yeah, that's a good call. And actually, I did just look at it, and it looks like Simon the Canaanite is actually... That's one of the ways that Simon the Zealot is referred to. So I guess that's a good point there too. One thing I'll note, when I read through Flavius Josephus, I think the first name he gives to them is the fourth philosophy. That's what he calls them by. And I can't remember if he actually uses the term zealot. And I know he talks about Sicarii. I don't know if they're the same thing. I can't remember. But yeah, so that would... And that's if he does use the word zealot, he at least, like when he's explaining all the different Jewish sects, he refers to this Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the fourth philosophy. He doesn't use the term zealot. So that would make sense that the term zeal is referring to him as a character and not him aligning with this sectarian party. And I guess would make extra sense if he was a Canaanite, because I guess in calling him a zealot, it's saying he's not just a Canaanite, but he's a Canaanite who's zealous for God. That would actually make a lot of sense there.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So anyway, we now know the backstory of Simon the Canaanite, who might have been Simon the Zealot, as in he is a group of people who sticks knives into people and was anti-Roman Empire, or he was a person who was zealous for God. So
yeah,
there you
go. Good catch there. Yeah. Because you had me look it up, and yeah, it is Simon the Zealot. Yeah. Wow. And I think that this story is also recalling the proto-evangelium, which is Genesis 3:15. I think at least serpents and dragons do tend to refer to, as we've seen throughout these apocryphal gospels, these do tend to represent the Satan. And so to one extent or another, yeah, I think this is a reference to that, which is the proto-evangelium is called proto-evangelium, the first preaching of the gospel, whenever God tells Eve that her seed will be at enmity with the seed of the serpent, and her seed will crush his head, even though the serpent will strike his heel and he will crush his head. So I think this is kind of like a proto version of that, which would make sense if the earlier story was recalling the triumphal entry, then this is recalling his like crucifixion, I guess, you know, like him cursing the snake and the snake being exploded.
Okay, I'm actually trying to put that together. How does him cursing the snake and it exploding relating? Are you saying like the earlier story with him getting circumcised is like, okay, no, okay, never mind. I'm not following
No,
entirely.
I'm saying, no, you're good. It's like a foreshadow of his death on the cross, how that's destroying the powers of Satan and sin. In the proto-evangelium, he curses the serpent and the serpent just explodes after he's been crowned with a crown of flowers and the kids lay down their cloaks and everything in front of
Okay,
him.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, just like how in the Gospels you have the triumphal entry, and then he would go ahead and he dies on the cross. In this case, you have the flowers for the kids, and then so the crown of thorns, and then also he has explodes the snake and fulfills the proto-evangelium. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow, thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
That makes
exactly.
sense.
Yeah. So pretty good. Okay, so in this next story, Jesus is now 12. Oh, okay. This is a good story. I actually really like this. This is one of the last stories before this one ends. So remember, the only story we have of Jesus' infancy, other than him being 2 in Matthew, when he doesn't actively do anything, it's just Herod trying to kill him. At his circumcision when he's 8 days old in Luke, and when he's 12 at the temple in Luke. Only stories. Okay. So this is a retelling of when he's 12 at the temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus is 12. He stays behind at the feast in Jerusalem when Mary and Joseph went on because they thought that he was with them. And this is the story. This is what he was doing at the temple. You want to know what he was doing? What questions he was asking? Because in the canonical gospels, Mary and Joseph come back, and Jesus is impressing people with the questions that he's asking. And in Judaism, I think I've heard that like a good question is as good as like a good answer. Like a good question is pretty good, like that's seen as like, oh, you're a smart person, which, there is. I hate to crush the souls of some of our listeners, but there are such things as bad questions and good questions, so, or there are at least better questions and worse questions. So it's a little biased, but according to the canonical gospels. So, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, like the better you know, the better questions you ask. The better questions you ask, the better you know. Like those two things go hand in hand. So asking good questions is a skill. We're about to see how genius Jesus was at 12.
Yeah. Well, actually, this one, in a sense, kind of like, well, you'll just see, but pretty much instead of making it more an emphasis on his questions, it just shows he's asking questions to show that he knows a lot. So, anyways, he stayed behind in Jerusalem and he's asking the teachers and the elders questions and explaining things that they don't know. So he asks, who's the Messiah? And when they respond that he's the son of David, he asks why the Spirit inspired David to say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand that I may put your enemies under your feet. Oh yeah, if he's the son of David, then why Psalm 110, which is, by the way, one of the questions that he asks in the canonical gospels, which is all the more shameful because these religious leaders have had
All this time.
let's see, they've had 30 years. Yeah, they've had 21 years to think about the answer to this question, and they don't even get it. So then, but it just keeps on going. Actually, I can't remember if okay, yeah. It keeps going. So the teachers ask if he has read the books. If he has read the books. The books. Have you read the books? And Jesus says he has read all of them and explains the books, laws, mystery, and things no one has understood. The teachers say they have never heard of such knowledge. And then, okay, you think that's good. Then a philosopher and astronomer asks if he has studied astronomy, and Jesus begins to explain spheres and heavenly bodies. One natural scientist asks him if he's studied medicine, and Jesus explains physics, metaphysics, and so on, keeps going. And the scientist says he will become his disciple and slave. And then Mary finds him and takes him back just before Jesus is about to tell them how to, get in an electrical current and, make the iPhone and everything.
Did you
I love
know?
that story.
You don't know about atoms,
Yeah.
but not just atoms. There's everything's made up of atoms, but it's not even quantum mechanics. Just throwing it at him.
Yeah, I think the only way that they could have made this better is if Jesus was actually if he was actually left at the Library of Alexandria, and somebody says, "I've read all these books," and starts quizzing Jesus, and Jesus starts asking this guy something he's never known, and if I don't know, if maybe some people could fake a new manuscript of this where Jesus explains the iPhone and tells them that they're gonna make cars and I don't know. I don't know, but this is a pretty fantastic scene as it is. Yeah.
Did you know?
He doesn't stop at the scriptures.
Did you know that the average airspeed velocity of a European unladen swallow is? I'd never even thought about that. Anyway.
Yeah, really. Dude, they should have had this depressed man who just got rejected by a girl come up to him and ask him a question, and Jesus is just telling him giving him all the Riz advice on how to get a girl.
Thing.
Yeah.
Those are the good answers, the most important answers. How to successfully relationship. Never have challenges again.
Yeah. Man, that would have been great. But Mary just had to stop him. Man. Yeah, anyways, I don't know if you have anything else about that scene, but it's if there was a movie adaptation of the Gospels, this would just be such a great scene. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, the last story, at least the one that we talk about. Oh, yes. This is the last chapter. So Jesus goes home from staying at a long feast at Jerusalem. Jesus hides his miracles. Oh, no. Sorry. Yeah. So this is following right after that. Then after that feast, Jesus just drops all these bombs on these astronomers, natural scientists, religious leaders, gives them everything. And then he goes home and hides his miracles and mysteries until he turns 30 and was baptized. And that's the end.
Dang. Wow. This is, well, okay. Well, keeping in with the whole hide the miracles and stuff like that it's actually keeping with most of what, the Gospels seem to imply. Or they seem to say, Jesus was regularly saying, "Hey, don't share anyone what I did." So that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, Jesus doesn't really do any miracles in this other than exist and allow Mary to hand around his bathwater and swaddling cloths without consent. There's nothing that Jesus himself does throughout these canonical Gospels actively. Well, I guess he begins by saying that he's the Logos, the Son of God, the Christ who's going to save the world at the beginning, but
yeah. Well, maybe that's actually the point. Maybe it's less about the mother's role and it's more about the child. We're all being curious here. I have no really good, sophisticated, whatever, but maybe it's more about the view of the children's role. The children are more passive and have less of an active role, which is not how you'd imagine things to be. You'd expect children to grow up quicker in older times, but maybe that's kind of the point. Is Jesus is supposed to be passive and children are supposed to be quieter. I don't know, not quieter, but maybe quieter too, but less active in their lives.
Yeah,
in their own lives and their decisions, less autonomous. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess you'd probably start becoming autonomous around, or at least starting picking up on your trade whenever you become a teenager. Not that teenager was a concept that they had in that day, that was fundamentally distinct, because that's a modern innovation. But I think, isn't that when they started learning trade, when they were around 13 or 14 or whatever, at least
I'm
for
not
the
sure.
guys. Yeah. Well,
No
at
idea.
least in Judaism, that's when you would have your bar mitzvahs, when you turn 13, when you become a son of the law. So yeah. So anyways, that's the gospel. What thoughts do you have about it? What orthodoxy index rating would you give to it?
Whoa. Okay. So let's do the orthodoxy index. I want to hop on this one real quick, because most of it, what it says, doesn't seem to be problematic. It doesn't seem to be saying something against the Trinity. It doesn't seem to be saying anything that isn't saying that Jesus is God. The only thing that I'm seeing or noticing right now, as I think about it right now, is that it seems to exalt Mary in some kind of way that makes me uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
Feel
it
like,
bases it on Jesus's divinity too.
what do you mean by that?
In the beginning, whenever the handmaid comes to her, she says, just as Jesus is divine, so also his mother has to be greater.
Yeah. So that makes me cautious. So from my perspective, and I imagine that many others in Christendom would strongly disagree, but I think that is problematic and would make this about a 7 on the orthodoxy index. I think about a 7 is probably fair. It's like, it's good, but there is that, so.
Yeah, that's the same. That's about the only thing for me. I do have a question about this because I know you've read on the incarnation, and my Christology isn't like fantastic, but Jesus, there's no learning curve for him. There's no learning anything.
Mm.
And I would assume, especially because of the passage in Luke where it says he grew in wisdom and stature. And I don't know how that works with the hypostatic union, but I know those two. I hold to the Apostles' Creed, so I believe that. I hold to the Athanasian Creed. But how would you say how orthodox would you think that is?
Yeah, because you'd
Does
be in
that
some
conflict or
senses saying he's not human. And I think of this in terms of like, horses or deer. I think it's deer as soon as they're born, they start walking and running and doing everything humans develop. Like, that's
Mhm.
part of what it means to be human. And we believe, Christians who believe, the these creeds would say Jesus is completely human. So
Mm.
to say that he knows everything automatically might put into question his humanity, especially if he's using language. Like, language is a learned thing
Mm.
that exists with other people, which is also why it'd be weird. He probably would not be talking about atoms and quantum mechanics because those words probably would not be developed, right? To get someone to understand, you can't say quantum mechanics if there's no framework to even. What is the word quantum?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know what quantum means. Maybe there is some translation to that. But like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, and so I think that might also be a problem as well. But it doesn't appear like he's like that most of it. Like, the majority of based on what you've described, a lot of the stories, he seems to be relatively childlike or not super active. So it makes you think he's more childlike. I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's just in the stories where he does do something when he's a baby and when he's at the temple, he does have that. There's no development or like character growth. He just
Yeah.
is. I guess that would be coming to think of it, isn't that I don't know if there's a term for it. I don't think it's meophysitism. That's just saying that, like, I think that's like when he has one will. I can't remember. But this is the view that I know I think this is like the 4th or 5th century, and somebody was taught, the church fathers were talking about it. But how Jesus, like the idea that Jesus's divine nature was his soul or his mind, and then his human nature was his human body. So there was kind of
Hmm.
maybe like a little bit too much of a divide. And then, the whole, and by the way, the reason why that's wrong is I can't remember who was the father who explained this. It might have been Chrysostom or a Cappadocian. I can't remember. I think the explanation is what Jesus, if he didn't assume it, he didn't redeem it. So if Jesus didn't take it on, then he didn't also save it.
Hmm.
So in other words, for Jesus to save our minds and be able to save us from the sins of, from like our sinful minds, whatever it is, then Jesus had to take on a human mind as well. All of it existed. He existed fully divine while fully human, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes
So I feel
sense.
like I think that's so I guess it's not that this text necessarily has a lot of that heresy in it, but whenever the author is writing about Jesus, he does seem to assume that. So I guess the text doesn't have that, I guess, if that makes sense, just because Jesus doesn't do a whole lot.
Yeah. Hmm. I don't know. So what would you orthodoxy index this being?
Yeah, I guess I was gonna give it an 8 because of like the overemphasis on Mary. But I think with that, I'll give it a 7 as well, just because I want to be generous and because I think that it is possible to just say it was a miracle that Jesus said that at his birth. And it does seem to assume that higher nature, but I just want to be generous. And because there isn't a whole lot of Jesus actively doing stuff, yeah, I'll give it a 7 and say like most people, like that's a passing grade. So like most people, if you read this, I don't think you would necessarily take on
Become
that
a heretic.
heresy, or
Yeah.
yeah. So
Sweet.
yeah, this
Makes
is
sense.
if you're looking for an apocryphal gospel to get somebody who likes superheroes into watching it, like into reading apocryphal literature, you have like somebody literally shooting lasers out of their eyes. This is the
Superman is a copy.
Superman all the way in the 5th century. Yeah, that is the Arabic. Is it the Arabic Infancy Gospel? I gotta
Yeah.
look at my notes again.
Is
Yeah,
the Arabic
that is
Infancy
the
Gospel.
Arabic Infancy Gospel. Yes. Let us know what orthodoxy index you would give it in the comments down below. Share it, and we will see you next time in Babylonia. Until then,
It's
Babylon.
Babylon.